Well, hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We appreciate you spending the next half hour with us. My name is Amanda, and I will be your host. Please feel free to contact me with any assistance you need or questions you have by typing them into the chat box or by sending an email to support@kit.org. And the slide note handout for today's webinar is available in our Online Learning Center in the Resources section for this event. And today's webinar is continuing our preschool series, and it is on resources, questions, and answers. And your presenter today is Jeremy Crisp. Jeremy is a KIT Education and Training Specialist, and actually formerly he was an Education and Training Specialist. Now he's the Program Manager for KIT in our Washington, D.C. office. He has his bachelor's in psychology and his master's in family life and youth development. And he has a strong background in child and youth nonprofit administration and program evaluation. And with that, I am now pleased to turn it over to Jeremy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our question and answer session on preschool rooms. My name is Jeremy Crisp, as Amanda said, and today we are going to be looking at some resources and providing answers to some questions you may have regarding your programs. And our objectives are for you to evaluate if those resources will be useful in your classroom or programs, and also to reflect on and identify any questions you may have regarding challenges in your program, specifically regarding classroom routines, social emotional supports, and interactions in the classroom. Throughout the presentation, we will be presenting topics around each of those areas. However, if you're participating, you are invited to ask a question at any time, and we will be happy to connect with some answers to those questions, as well as provide some resources that may possibly help you problem solve those challenges as well. And again, the three areas we're focusing on during our presentation today are classroom routines, social emotional supports, as well as interactions. There are several routines that happen in your classroom throughout the day. The routines include a lot of classroom expectations, as well as things that are just kind of common language in your classroom and how your classroom runs and functions, as well as formal transitions. And transitions can take a lot of there's a lot of activities that can be transitions. Transitions can be from activity to activity. Transitions can also be making one choice to another choice. But transitions can also be more formal, from going inside to outside. Lots of times as adults, we tend to think really solid about transitions, and we know what we're expecting to happen in the classroom, but we don't necessarily convey those messages in consistent ways to participants. So we're going to examine some resources to help us think through how we're providing information about those routines to our class. The first item we're going to discuss is classroom rules and expectations. Very often I will see in classrooms, classrooms utilize rules in a few different capacities. Most often classroom rules tend to be in a common area in the classroom where the kids will be able to refer to them regularly, and teachers will be able to refer to them throughout their interactions during the day. A best practice for routines or for classroom rules and expectations are that the classroom rules use both words and visuals, especially at the preschool level, as children developmentally at this age are learning how to use and process words and language as well. When you use a chart like this, it is recommended that you would embed reviewing classroom rules into the daily routine of the classroom. How I've seen this happen best is usually when, as you're beginning like a morning circle time or a morning carpet time, that there would be one person whose job it would be through each day that rotates to review the rules with the class. And this obviously is a way to share some responsibility, but also a way to reinforce those rules and have children reinforce those rules to each other. This was also how I've seen classroom rules best utilized is when maybe there is a large visual display, but also one that can be used in a more mobile type of setting. Very often when a teacher is needing to reinforce rules, you're not necessarily beside the rules chart. So it may be useful to possibly have a small printed visual that may be laminated that you can use for a visual reinforcement to bring over to an interaction, maybe where you're trying to redirect the child or direct a child to a more appropriate behavior. This visual is one that I made that I used to use in some of my programs, but you can create visuals using a lot of different formats. Certainly you can use clip art in any Microsoft Word program, and Microsoft Word's also recently incorporated some cool icons, but I'm also going to put into the chat box a free visual resource that's a visual engine that you can use to create templates to make visual supports in a variety of settings. Next, we're going to look at classroom schedules and how preschool classrooms in particular use picture schedules. I've seen schedules utilized in many different ways, and I think it's a best practice for teachers to use classroom schedules in a way that best supports their unique population of kids. What I think is a best practice in utilizing a picture schedule is having the picture schedule on the child's level, but also having a movement item on that picture schedule. Very often, if a picture schedule isn't dynamic and doesn't change from day to day, in the kids' eyes, the picture schedule can become much more like classroom art and not something that is really reflective of their day or how they can expect their routine to progress throughout their day. You can use an indicator item on a classroom picture schedule that's reflective of the class. So if you're a classroom that has the name like the starfish or the seals, then you can have a small starfish or seal printed, and that item can move from activity to activity as your day is progressing. Or you can just use something like an arrow or a star indicating which item you're moving to from activity time to activity time. The interactive movement item, it can also be a classroom job as well and will allow for children to share some responsibility, but also really see how their day is progressing from activity to activity. Transitions are an area that are a constant battle for classrooms. We do have to remember that transitions happen all the time and throughout the day. Transitions can be formal, an activity to transition, or it can also be informal, making a different choice from one activity space to another. Also, a change in the environment can be processed very much so like a transition as well. I remind teachers frequently that I know their breaks are very important to them, and it's a very important time for them because they may have some personal needs that they need to take care of, or they may also be needing to, make a telephone call or an appointment. But remember that when you transition in and out of the class, you are a social and emotional support for the kids that are there. And there are some kids that really like you and depend on you. So when you're leaving the classroom, that is a transition. And when possible, we certainly should make time to prepare kids for that transition, maybe introduce them to a flex teacher that may be covering for them while they're gone, and maybe even provide some type of interaction by giving a question they can ask the teacher that you're going to ask the answer to when they come back. But transitions often can also add a demand to a kid. So if we're going outside and it's cold, we may need to put on our coat, or we might need to wash our hands before we go to the table. So making sure that we're presenting those steps to children that may need some time processing, and we're doing it on an individual basis. So we're meeting a kid's individual needs if they need some additional processing time or some more one-on-one cues to support the transition. Transitions are also a time that frequently have challenges associated with them. In most classrooms, there is a really big monster transition in the day after lunch, where children are cleaning up the table, brushing their teeth, washing their hands. Usually, teachers are attempting to get the class to engage in a calm down activity that may be on the carpet, or they're trying to redirect them to nap time or getting them to calm down. I think that transition tends to be the most difficult and sometimes challenging transition of the day. So it is really important that the teachers' environment support the environmental supports they want for kids to be able to manage those transitions themselves. When they've embedded the transitional supports into the routine, you can really see that kids are taking ownership and responsibility of the task that they need to do during that time of the schedule. I've also seen a lot of transition challenges that come when transitions become too lengthy, and most often that seems to be associated with some level of teachers needing to maintain accountability. So children move around and are also needing to prepare for what they're getting prepared to do if that's going outside. And so we're going to explore some possible resources for how to maintain accountability in a more interactive way coming up. Are there any other, from participants, if there are any other transitional challenges that you run into, please take a moment to type in the chat box, and we can try to address those and associate those with some resources to better support your classroom's transitional needs. A transitional tool I frequently use and suggest for classrooms is what we call a transition time timer. This time timer is really simple on one level. On one side, it is a clock, and on the other side, it is a stop sign. I like this transitional tool because it communicates a lot using several different capacities. When this is used in the classroom, I recommend that it be associated with a classroom job as well for a child who's assigned to be the timekeeper. And then there's a medium-sized poster that maybe reflects this in your classroom. When it's time to begin to transition kids during an activity, the teachers would make an announcement that it's time to look at the time timer. That would be the child whose job it is cue to go and flip one of the strips on the clock. And then you ask the class how many strips are left. And as it progresses, obviously you want kids to hold up 3 when the first strip is flipped, 2 when the second strip is flipped, and so on. As it gets to stop, you're communicating that that's the end of that activity and we're going to clean up and prepare for the next task that we have. What I really appreciate about this visual is that it is an auditory cue when it's used fully, as well as a visual cue, and also a tactile cue for the child who is touching it and able to engage in it. Obviously, we would encourage you to make an individual one if there was a child that needed an individual transitional cue that could be put on a small board or a small clipboard. When fully utilized, it can be a really strong way to embed transitional supports into your day-to-day routine. Another really amazing transitional tool that I saw in one classroom was what they called the transition train. And I think this tool was designed really with teacher accountability in mind, or classroom accountability in mind, and to make the accountability process a little bit more interactive. They made laminated tickets for each child in the class, and that was their train ticket. And they even had a caboose as an engine for their train, which rotated. And each child would get their ticket and turn in the ticket to the conductor, who was the teacher. And as they were transitioning this way, it was a much more interactive way for the class to do name to face accountability, and then also maintain just a more interactive and more personal level of transitioning a class. I think during accountability is really often where kids end up having to sit for long periods of time, and that's often when behavior challenges arise too. So coming up with activities like this during transitions are a much stronger way to encourage interaction and to make it a more smooth process where kids are going to be less likely to run into behavioral challenges throughout the day. The next level of resources we're going to be considering about classrooms has to do with social and emotional supports. I frequently go back to a phrase when I'm thinking about social emotional supports and how social emotional supports are made stronger in classrooms. And that's name it to tame it. And a really great resource down there is The Whole Brain Child, where this philosophy came from, or where I learned about this philosophy, which is a fantastic resource. But using name it to tame it, basically what you're doing is you're connecting emotions to behavior. When you're practicing identifying emotions or encouraging children to identify emotions, what you're doing is you're realizing that kids are not going to respond in an appropriate way to emotional expression until really they can put some words around those emotions that they're feeling, which comes with a period of practice and being able to express those emotions in a variety of ways. When you're embracing the name it to tame it philosophy, it's understanding that all emotions are okay, but it's coaching how we express those emotions that sometimes we need to strengthen in our classroom interactions. When we practice recognizing emotions, we're able to approach shaping behavior from a more structured setting. And so we can actually plan to support emotional expression in a way that actually would decrease challenging behavior in our classrooms. As an example of how to utilize name it to tame it in our settings, we're going to look at how we would use a mood thermometer. A mood thermometer, you may have seen a mood thermometer before. There are various visual tools that support this type of framework, but a mood thermometer really reinforces the philosophy of name it to tame it. The first task that you're associating with using a mood thermometer is really identifying those emotions. And on that level is when you're encouraging children to just accurately put the star on the item that they're feeling. And of course, this takes some practice. There very likely will be some mood thermometers that get torn up or destroyed when a kid is in the middle of an emotional expression that's really challenging. And that's okay. Hopefully we're printing several of them and laminating them on cardstock for durability. But when children are more accurately able to label those emotions, they're going to be able to be heard. And something about the emotional process, when you're heard and you're validated, you're kind of allowed to de-escalate those emotions in a way that's much more supportive. After you get children to accurately name and express those emotions and identify where they are, then you can also begin a little bit of the mental work of taming those emotions. And that looks like a few different things depending on where children are in their expression. But it can be as simple as coaching children and recognizing and responding, all right, I see that we're upset. It's okay to be upset, but I'm wondering if there's any choices that we can make in our class that might make us feel one of these lower emotions. Maybe is there a book we can read and I'll sit and read that with you, or is there a quiet, more cozy area that we might want to go to? Using that type of framework, you're really supporting the tame it philosophy. So helping children understand that we can make some decisions that influence our emotional expression. Ideally, you would put a mood thermometer in a cozy area of the classroom, but remember, or I encourage teachers to remember that very often those emotional crises don't happen in the cozy area. So how are we going to have tools available or flexible in all areas of the classroom? Any items like these that you can display using Velcro or using a board that the visual can be clipped on makes it much more flexible and able to support the child in a variety of settings. Next, we are going to dive into classroom interactions. Interactions really shape a lot of the dynamic between children and teachers. Teachers are maintaining a lot throughout the day. They're maintaining the activities and the structure of the classroom, preparing materials, and also trying to think ahead of their class and foreseeing challenges that may be ahead of them. When we're interacting with kids and children have these emotional responses, I've seen teachers run into a lot of challenges around redirection. And very frequently when programs are describing behavioral challenges to me that children may be facing, I'll commonly hear that a child has difficulty being redirected or does not respond to redirection. During this time, I usually talk to teachers and remind them that to make sure that they're approaching redirection as a two-step process. Redirection is not just coaching the child to say, I don't like that, or it's not just telling them make another choice. Redirection often also implies that you have to strongly direct with the motivation of the child's behavior. And if that's an inappropriate behavior, we have to connect with what need is that child trying to meet by behaving this way. And so when we're able to see what that need is, that allows us to determine which activity they need to be redirected to or what need they're trying to meet and associate an activity with that. So if a child is behaving in a way where they're in an attention-seeking type of dynamic, they are going to behave in a way that they're going to get attention, whether that's positive or negative attention. And so when we want to connect with that, we want to connect them with an activity that they can get attention, but they're also behaving in a classroom-appropriate way. Very often that's when we're trying to encourage them to be a helper related to an activity, but it also might be allowing them to earn a one-on-one activity with a teacher, like doing a puzzle that they like to do together, or an activity that allows for that interpersonal interaction. When kids are running into the challenges, the behavioral challenges in their classrooms, we have to remember that is not a time that they are going to learn or respond well to coaching. Actually, when you're in the middle of conflict, your brain is not really at a place where it's going to take in information. So we have to make sure that we're finding ways to present this social coaching to children in an interactive way at a time when their brain is going to take in and process information. A way that we think about that is encouraging teachers to remember to be a coach and not necessarily a referee. Coaches are the ones that are enforce and constantly push kids towards rules. For children that are strong-willed and don't mind conflict, that very often leads to a one-on-one conflict between a teacher and a child. What we have to remember is that we should be a coach, and our primary goal should be to coach those interactions with kids. And so we're trying to guide them to make appropriate decisions, and we're going to do that with our language, which is why we say things like walking feet rather than no running, or gentle hands rather than no hitting. That type of language is coaching language as opposed to referee language. Another thing we should examine is the types of activities we're doing with children to encourage this social coaching thinking. A framework that I've used very often is social coaching activities around different classroom concepts, like things that it's okay to do in class and things that it's not okay to do in class. Things that it's okay to do when I'm upset and things that I'm not or I should not do when I'm upset. Another framework you can even take with this is encouraging self-care. If I touch this, are my hands clean or are my hands dirty? Is this a good friend decision or is this not a good friend decision? And when you're presenting choices to children in this way, you can come up with categories and visuals associated with those categories and actually turn this into a full circle time activity or a one-on-one activity that you might use to decompress from a challenging situation. So here's an example of things we do in class and things we don't do in class. And using these visuals, you may give one of each of these visuals to a child in a classroom and have them make yes and no decisions around, is this a good idea or is this not a good idea for class? And when you do that, you can have a yes visual and a no visual up in a circle time area. And obviously you're there to kind of coach as children are making decisions about each of the activities that are associated with the visuals or the displays that are presented. Using this type of framework, we're really taking an approach where we are really confident in shaping and coaching the social interactions that we expect to see in our classes throughout the day. These visuals are also visuals that you can use with parents when you're in the middle of supporting them through a unique behavior challenge. Very often it's hard for programs to think about what type of resources we're going to give for families for them to use. And so if you have this and you're encouraging parents to do this maybe before they go to bed at night with their child, it's just a simple ask that you can make of the family to support appropriate classroom expectations. And very often in those settings, when you're giving families activities to do like that, families are much more likely to kind of jump on board and be supportive in a way that coaches what you're expecting to see in the classroom. So that was the presentation around the topics that we had with supporting preschool classrooms in regarding some questions that come up to us frequently as well as resources to meet those questions. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda and see if any other questions came in throughout the presentation.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. And so far we don't have any questions that have come in, but I'll go ahead and give you guys a little bit of time now to type any questions you may have in the chat box on the left side of your screen. So we'll answer as many as we have time for, and any that we don't get to right now, we will answer later on via email. And for anyone who is watching this recording on our Online Learning Center, you can email your questions to support@kit.org, and Jeremy will be able to email you a response back. And following this session, you will be able to take a survey about your webinar experience through our Online Learning Center. So please be sure to take a moment to give us your feedback so we can continue to develop content that is valuable to you. And if you're interested in CEUs or a certificate for this webinar, remember to complete the quiz that becomes available at the end of this presentation. So when this webinar ends, please click the Take Quiz link that you will see on the left side of your screen after the recording has finished. And please also note that you have to first complete the survey before you can complete the quiz. So while we're waiting to see if anything else comes in, I'll go ahead and go through these last few slides. And I want to let you know that we are starting our school age/middle school series. And our first in that series is on the benefits of youth leadership. And we will facilitate this on December 12th. And in the meantime, we would love to stay connected with you socially. So here is our information for our Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest pages. And I'm looking around, and it still looks like we don't have anything coming in. I don't see any outstanding questions. It looks like you did a great job covering everything, Jeremy, so thank you so much for that. And we do hope that you guys got a lot out of this presentation. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us today. And please remember that KIT is here for you as a partner and a resource. So please reach out if there's anything we can do to assist you in any way. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you again, Jeremy, for leading, and we look forward to talking to you guys soon. Have a great day.